All right, let's go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Zoom for Lunch. This is March. March is Zoom for Lunch. It's March 3rd, 2021. And today we have a very capable and wonderful speaker, Sue Evans, and she's going to be speaking on the book, Have You Seen Luis Velez? By Catherine Ryan Hyde. And just a little bit ahead of it, let me just tell you, our book club read it, and so we loved it. And since she's part of our book club, we said, would you please do the discussion on this book, because it's something people want to hear and should hear about and should read. So having nothing really else to tell you about except for our ESL, English language classes continue, our book clubs continue, our poetry groups continue, our writing groups continue, our youth activity center continues, and our story time for children continues. Those things can be found on our Colby website, colbylibrary.com, if you want more information, or call us at the library. Take it away, Sue.
Thank you, Melanie. Hello? Hello? Do you know Luis Velez? Have you seen him? This is what 16-year-old Raymond hears one day on the second floor of his New York City apartment building as he's leaving for school with his best friend, Andre. This is the voice of an old woman standing at the doorway of her apartment. A very old woman. Raymond thought she looked 90. She was wearing a faded house dress printed with flowers, white terrycloth slippers. Her snow white hair was pulled back into a braid. Her eyes seemed to be turned in the direction of the stairs, as though she was looking at him. But she wasn't. Not really. There was no focus there. She seemed not to see him, even though he was standing right in her line of vision. You've just met the two main characters of this book, Have You Seen Luis Velez? And I absolutely loved both of these characters, and most especially Raymond. Raymond is one of my all-time favorites. He's a lonely, misfit, mixed-race teenager. One description of him is tall was something of a specialty for Raymond. I love this description because Raymond wasn't at all comfortable with either his body, his sexuality, or any kind of who he was. He has no friends except for Andre. And this is his last day with Andre because Andre is moving to California. His parents are divorced and he doesn't fit with his white mother's new family. He's Black and they're white. In a conversation later on with his 92-year-old friend, she asked about his family. Do you think they love you? He replies, that wasn't the question though. The question was whether I feel loved. Not usually, not so much. I think my baby sister loves me. My other two sisters, I don't know. I bet they do in there somewhere, but they have a funny way of showing it. My stepfather, he definitely doesn't love me. He doesn't dislike me, it's more he just accepts me. I came along with the deal when he met my mom. He loves his girls because, you know, they're his. What about your mother? She asks, Mrs. G. Raymond replies, she's just kind of busy raising 4 kids, working full time. Raymond doesn't fit with his father either, where he goes every other weekend. His father has a new wife who's less than 10 years older than Raymond, and she barely tolerates him. Here's how he describes his relationship with his father. Raymond figured he got along fine with his father. They had no beefs with each other and never argued, but they went nearly 2 weeks at a time without seeing each other. And then when they got together again, neither one of them seemed to be able to think of much to say, if anything. 11 pages into the book is where I really fell in love with Raymond, and I decided he was my all-time very favorite character I've met in a book. In an abandoned building on the way, his walk to school, along the school route, Raymond has discovered a tiny feral cat. With the money his dad gives him, he buys treats for this cat and feeds it each day on his way to school. This, of course, leaves him without any money to buy lunch at school. Let me read the description of this first day, not the first day, but this particular first day described in the book with the feral cat. Raymond stopped on his way after school. The cat jumped on the bench and mewed to him. She was a tiny cat, not a kitten, but young and small, long-bodied and skinny, an orange tabby with a thin little cry, like a mouse would make, or something else not even 1/10 her size. I know, he said, I'm late. I'm sorry I kept you waiting. He dug through his backpack and pulled out the treat he'd brought for her, an individual half-sized can of tuna with a ring top lid. He opened it and set it on the bench. For a moment, just the count of 2 or 3, she didn't go straight for it. Instead, she lobbied for one extra moment of affection. She rubbed her long body against Raymond's side, and when he ran his hands down her back, her tail end rose in the air. Her tail itself stood straight up like a furry antenna. It quivered in the air. Then she dug into the tuna. But that one moment when she chose him over the food, it was so sweet. It almost made Raymond want to cry. Or maybe that was his friend was moving away, or a combination. He didn't cry, he never did. Guess it's just you and me now, he said. That same day after school, as he's climbing the stairs to his apartment, he hears the same voice from the old woman. Is that Raymond? From the 4th floor? Raymond hesitates and kind of debates with himself, wondering if he should stop this time. He didn't earlier in the morning on the way to school, but finally he does stop. And here's their first real encounter. Thank you for stopping, she says, the old woman. Most people don't stop. Most people hurry by. When I ask a question, they hurry faster. I wonder sometimes why we're all so afraid of one another. Or actually, no, I don't really wonder. I know why, but I reflect on it, and I think it's a shame. I'm sorry about this morning, Raymond said. I was late for school. I understand completely, she said. I was just thinking, you live with your parents up there on the 4th floor. Pretty much my mother and stepfather. Maybe they know Luis Velez. I know it's not a likelihood because people come and go from the building and never speak. Look at us. We never said a word to each other before this morning, but I just can't help thinking for more than 4 years he came here to help me and check on me. There 3 times a week at a bare minimum. Maybe someone else who lives here might have seen him. This is Mildred, or Millie Guterman, or Mrs. G, as she's referred to. She's a 92-year-old German Jew who narrowly escaped the Holocaust, and that's a good backstory, by the way, in the book. She's blind, she's a widow with no children, she lives alone, and for the 4 years prior, the agency sent a helper, Luis Velez, to come. When the agency lost funding, Luis continued to come to help Mrs. G. So you see the kind of person he is also. The next day, Raymond takes the initiative to knock on her door. He discovers she's down to her last half a can of soup. And Luis Velez hasn't been there for 17 days, and Mrs. G hasn't been able to go to the bank or to the store to get food. So after 3 encounters, Raymond takes over Luis Velez's care of Mrs. G. He walks her to the bank and the store. They drink tea, have long conversations, and get to know each other. A wonderful, deep, heartwarming friendship develops between this 92-year-old woman and this 16-year-old teenage boy. He also wants to find Luis for Mildred. She was very fond of him, and he feels badly that she doesn't know what's happened to him. Raymond overcomes his shyness, his uncomfortableness with people to search for Luis Velez. There are 20 listings in the white pages of the phone book, and he decides he's going to contact everyone. Here's another thing that endeared Raymond to me. He goes to the school library and wants to check out a Spanish dictionary because he feels like he might need to know some phrases in Spanish to help him on this quest to find Luis Velez. Despite discomfort, Raymond is willing to call on strangers named Luis Velez and even travel to dangerous neighborhoods in New York City, all for Mildred, whom he respects for her wisdom, knowledge, and kindness. Through his search for Luis Velez, he meets other people who become his friends. They see him for the kind, thoughtful young man he is, and he becomes the catalyst for others to do good deeds. These new friends become Mrs. G's friends too, and she rediscovers community, neighborliness, and generosity. Mrs. G has lived in this particular apartment building for 67 years and has seen so much change. She remarks that she used to know all her neighbors. She had friends, but they have all moved or she's outlived them. She's lonely and she's sad. Her three best neighbor friends have passed away in the past 2 months. There used to be a different sort of feel to this neighborhood, says Millie. I know that from my own experience, but then the mayor wanted to clean up Times Square, so the crime that he didn't want there, he pushed west, and we are the unfortunate recipients. How long have you lived here? Raymond asks. 67 years, she replies. 67 years? It came out something close to a full-throated shout. That's before my parents were born. That's before my grandparents were born. Then Raymond stopped himself and felt ashamed of his thoughtlessness. I'm sorry, he said. You spend a lot of time being sorry, Raymond, from the 4th floor, but most of the time I don't know for what. That came out kind of rude, he said. If you think I don't know I'm old, she said, you can put your mind to rest on that score. But Raymond helps her see beyond her despondency over a neighborhood that has devolved into bigotry, fear. He helps her see that for every terrible act, there's a mirror image of deep kindness. And for all the uncaring, indifferent, heartless people, there are those who really do care. His kindness brings her out of the darkness and helps her to remember that living a long life, and this is a quote from her, is a gift denied to many. And so it comes with the responsibility to make the most of it. At the very least, appreciate it. People gripe about growing older, their aches and pains, how much harder everything is, as if they had forgotten that the alternative is dying young. Mrs. G helps Raymond transform into his own unique self. He discovers that helping someone brings him rewards. His self-esteem improves, he becomes a more secure young man, full of confidence, and he learns to develop a relationship with a variety of people who come into his life. An old woman who cannot see is ironically the first person Raymond feels who has ever truly seen him. As Mrs. G puts it, when it comes to seeing what is important about a person, I think it's possible that what our eyes tell us is only a distraction. Mrs. G gives Raymond advice, wisdom, and guidance in a way that's never heavy-handed or preachy. She nourishes him, she understands him, she motivates him, and she teaches him many lessons about himself, people, and the world. So I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to tell you any more of the story of Raymond and Mrs. G. I'm going to let you discover their wonderful friendship and their journey on your own. You also need to look for The Fate of the Cat. I'm not going to tell you what happened there. And I'll let you discover the outcome of Raymond's search for Luis Velez. This is an uplifting, motivating story. And just a little bit of a spoiler, you may need a Kleenex a time or two if you're like me. Now about the author, because I'm not going to tell you any more of the story. The author is Catherine Ryan Hyde. I found her to be a really interesting person. There's a lot on the internet about her, and she was very generous in there and has been with the interviews she gives. Very revealing about her writing and who she is. She was born Catherine Feinberg almost 66 years ago. She's the youngest of 3 sisters, 2 other writers in the family, her mother and her middle transgender sister. Her father was a musician, and she grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Buffalo, New York. She had an unhappy childhood, a dysfunctional family. Here's how she talks about it. My family, though full of well-meaning individuals, was a scene of a great deal of heartache and chaos. Everybody seemed quite busy with the problems at hand, so I became the disappearing child. I amused myself by making up stories in my head and try not to need anything from the people around me. Too bad that never works. Now I seem to write stories about kids and sometimes other people who fall through the cracks and need someone to catch them. I don't suppose that's a coincidence. I don't suppose anything in life is. Catherine loved reading as a child. She mentions Dr. Seuss, Winnie the Pooh, the Black Stallion stories, and again, in her own words. Then came school, in which an irresistible force met an immovable object. I hated the books I was given to read. They didn't speak to me. They were almost as bad as I hate to even utter the word homework. I began avoiding reading if possible. I honed the talent of writing book reports on books I hadn't read. To this day, I have a chip on my shoulder about the classics. I've tried twice to read Moby Dick. I give up. I'm not ashamed either. I like modern, fast-moving fiction. I've taken my last run at the Great White Whale, ever. It's over. Her favorite teacher was her high school English teacher, whom she called Lenny. She said, he gave us different books written in the same century he assigned them. Books with down and out characters, people outside the mainstream. I understood these people. I was outside the mainstream. I was overweight, had braces on my teeth, and my peer group thought I was from outer space. I liked reading about characters on the margins. We had something in common. Miracle of miracles, I woke up one day. Lenny gave out a creative writing assignment, an essay on any subject. I still remember how he walked up to the blackboard and wrote in big black letters, block letters, I ain't taking it after Friday. Not exactly your run-of-the-mill English teacher, right? I was so impressed by his willingness to meet us where we live that I decided to impress him back. I wrote an essay intended to be funny, always risky. It was a takeoff on The Dog Ate My Homework, excuse note, a long, rambling, slapstick story explaining why I was not able to hand in my essay on time. Sight unseen, Lenny read it out loud in front of the class. They laughed, everybody, including Lenny. They laughed a lot for a long time. It was my first whiff of the rare smell of success. Lenny told the class my essay was clever. Later, I found out he was still talking about it in the staff lounge that day. He told all the other teachers I could write. Although this experience was her inspiration to become a writer, she didn't do it for many, many years. She graduated from high school, and when she was 17, she relocated to the LA area. She changed her name to Ryan. Remember, she was born with Feinberg as her last name. This was the name of her friend. She worked as a dog trainer, a pastry chef, a shade tree mechanic, whatever that is, and a Hearst Castle tour guide. Early in the 80s, she decided to put all her efforts into becoming a writer. And during these years, she said she was a practicing addict and alcoholic, but she's now been in recovery for 26 years. Sometime in this period, she added Hyde to her name also. This was her mother's maiden name, and she became Catherine Ryan Hyde. She toiled years before seeing success and any concrete returns for her writing. She claimed she had 122 rejections before getting her first big break. Her first published novel was in 1997. It's called Funerals for Horses. And probably one of her best known novels was her second one in 1999, Pay It Forward. This was adapted into a movie in 2000 starring Kevin Costner and Helen Hunt. Catherine Ryan Hyde is considered a short story writer. She writes many and has written many short stories, and a novelist of adult and young adult. These are considered young adult fiction books. Like Raymond, many of her characters are young people. She's written 32 novels, and published 3 short story collections, say that fast, and 3 nonfiction books. One of them is called 365 Days of Gratitude, and it includes her photographs. Our library has, besides What Happened to Louise Velez, 4 of her books: Language of Hoofbeats, Love in the Present Tense, My Name is Anton, and Pay It Forward, her most famous, probably most famous book. She's won numerous honors and awards. She teaches workshops, does public speaking, and is the founder and past president of the Pay It Forward Foundation, which was established in 2000 as a catalyst to inspire growth for the Pay It Forward philosophy. This philosophy is very simply, acts of kindness among strangers generate a ripple effect from one person to another, from one town to another, from one community to the other, and so forth. I was telling Melanie that there is a Pay It Forward Day, which is April 25th. And the goal of that day is to make the world a better place for all. Currently, Hyde lives in Cambria, California with her dog Ella and a cat, Jordan, and a horse she named Soul, S-O-U-L, who she is training for English dressage. She loves to hike, particularly on trails that gain altitude. She's hiked up and down the Grand Canyon. She's backpacked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. She's hiked and backpacked in the Himalayas of Nepal. Obviously, she likes to travel and she loves the outdoors. Her favorite activity is photography. Finally, why I love this book and why I think many of you will too. First of all, the characters, as I've explained. They're fully developed and I felt like I knew them. Even the minor ones, I felt like if I met them, I would know them. They're realistic, they're human, they're empathetic people, and they're memorable. And after I finished the book, they felt like old friends to me that I wanted the very best for. So if you want to meet 2 very cool people and the people they meet, Raymond and Mrs. G, read this book. We need more Raymonds and Mrs. G's, people who are willing to reach out and share in ways that really matter. Second reason I like this book is the way Hyde writes. Raymond is the voice, tells the story, and it's very authentic. The dialogue sounds like the way we talk. It's not stilted and it's very realistic. There's lots of dialogue, which moves the plot forward and gives the reader insight into the character's feelings and thoughts. I tried to pick passages to read to you without giving anything away that demonstrated her writing style. She writes simply, and there are no long descriptive flowering passages, the kind I usually roll my eyes and skip. The one of Mrs. G standing in the doorway of her apartment is the way things are described, and those don't happen all that often. In 320 pages, a beautiful, endearing story about finding kindness and goodness in people unfolds quite perfectly. The third reason I liked this book, have you seen Luis Velez? It tackles some serious thought-provoking themes. Topics woven into this story include, and there's a long list, privilege, loss, forgiveness, compassion, sexuality, diversity, loneliness, community, friendship, disabilities, aging and the elderly, prejudice, empathy, and self-acceptance. The book is chock full of wisdom on these topics, both in dialogue and action. There is a discussion, and again, it's not preachy or in your face, of a lot of societal problems. And one of the main ones is how a small person can get lost in the cracks and nobody notices. Mrs. G was a prime example, falling through the cracks. Raymond was the other example. A second thing that in the book was how fast we judge someone and how many times we will never get to the humanity we have in common. Here's the way Hyde describes it in her own words. I just try to get underneath our differences. I try to write from that place where we're all human and we all resonate on the same emotions. The more a group of people is marginalized, the more I want to humanize them in my writing. I think the biggest thing that's gone wrong in our society is the construct of the other. There is no other. We are all just people. Take away the false notion of otherness, and the only problems left would be likely related to the weather. What is our responsibility to each other? We seem to have social contracts that limit our involvement in the problems of others, but people step over those lines in the sand all the time. So now I wonder why the lines are even there. And I'm fascinated by people who help, not just because they have to, but because they can. And a final thought from the author. In one of the interviews, she was asked, what is the legacy that you want your books to read? And she says, I think what I'm going for, and I really only see this in retrospect, I don't set out with this kind of theme consciously in mind, is a more open and loving look at what it means to be human. I feel that a book can be a look into the mind and heart of someone you might not want to know in real life. But knowing them on the page, there's that recognition of a common humanity. It's likely that most of us would not have known Raymond or Mrs. G in life, but through the book, you can get to know them and the other people. It's a book that I loved, and I'm sure you will too. I'm going to check it back in, by the way, so quick, get on the phone and call and get it reserved.
Thank you, Sue. We just really appreciate that. This book will be available for checkout. The other four books also. Her newest book, My Name is Anton, is also in the new book section. So come in. If you can't get this one, you can check 4 others out. See you next month.